16 out of fuel. 48 out of fuel.
A bunch of them out of gas.
They're not going.
2's out of gas.
Jesse Love out of fuel. Here comes. He did probably the best job under green to say.
I've got to be honest here. With about 15 to go, maybe even 20 to go, I had started thinking of different situations in my head, like, how am I going to intro this video? How am I going to lead it off? I have all these lines ready to say some good joke or something. Or, I had this whole thing written up. If SVG finished like 10th, he was running 11th or 12th there in the last 20 or so laps. And I was like, all right, I got this thing written up. It's perfect. It's going to work. We're going to go with that because, something will happen on the last lap. He'll end up in the top 10. And then it happened. Ford had one of the biggest fuel strategy disaster classes of all time. But instead, I went with this rambling intro / meme intro. Underrated national anthem. The New Zealand national anthem, by the way. But yes, we're going to talk about Shane Van Gisbergen's second ever start in the Xfinity Series, in which he finished third. You heard me right. SVG finished third in his second ever Xfinity Series race, his second ever start at a super speedway. Now look, NASCAR fans are going to be like, Atlanta super speedway? Yes, Atlanta is a 1.5 mile track. Atlanta is more similar to a track like next week, Las Vegas, a Texas Motor Speedway, Charlotte. It's the same length as those tracks. But a couple of years ago, they made the decision to give the track more banking. I think they raised it from about 24 degrees to 28, 29 degrees. And they decided to give every series the super speedway package. So basically, this Atlanta track, while the same size as a Texas, Charlotte, Vegas, it races more similar to a track like last week, Daytona or Talladega, where everyone is in a pack close together. You can have 10, 15, 20 cars within just a couple of seconds of each other because of the restrictor plate, because of the tapered spacer that reduces the amount of airflow and, reduces the horsepower, whatever it is, to make the cars go slower in a sense. Extremely random note that I forgot to mention in this video, but I just am now post-production, post-filming, wanted to mention. It was really cool to see the pictures and videos of SVG's former Supercars team, watching him race in the Xfinity Series while at Bathurst. That was a really cool thing to see. So this week was more similar to last week in terms of the racing and the car itself, but because this track is a full mile shorter than Daytona, you got to turn the wheel a little bit more. So that from that aspect, it was a little bit more different. If Daytona and Talladega were back-to-back, I'd say from that aspect, it's almost the same. It's more similar than comparing Daytona and Atlanta, at least. So SVG from that learning curve, yes, he just got some super speedway experience at Daytona, but Atlanta is a different animal. It's like a hybrid of a super speedway and your regular intermediate speedway track. So it's different. SVG had never driven a lap at this track prior to today. Qualifying was his first effort, goes out there, makes his lap, and he qualifies 13th, which is respectable. He's right outside of the top 10. He's right there in contention for stage points. Not as good as his fifth at Daytona, obviously, but still, that's a respectable result, especially when you consider that it was his first ever lap at Atlanta. And while the racing is similar to Daytona, as I said earlier, it's a mile shorter track. You're turning that wheel a little bit more. So very respectable qualifying effort. Then the race happens, and we talked about last week with SVG's debut. It was an incident-filled debut. Now, one of those incidents was his fault, but for the most part, it was typical super speedway stuff. We talked about it last week. Super speedways are full of crashes, big crashes, because everyone is so bunched up together. If someone wrecks in the front, everyone behind gets taken with them. We'll see 15, 20 car pileups, and SVG just happened to get involved in a few of those, but he was able to come back and finish 12th. This week, I've talked about how similar this racing is so much. Not a lot of crashes in this one. Honestly, mostly single car incidents. It was a fairly tame race. In fact, SVG was in 0 incidents. We have nothing to report on him this week, so good job from that aspect. And in terms of his races up until this last restart, was pretty straightforward. He was running 10th to 15th the majority of this race. kept it clean, kept it in line. The only real problem that he had today was after the first stage, he had to come back to pit road, pit once again because they had to make an adjustment to the left rear, because earlier in this race, like lap 3 or 4 of the race, SVG's teammate Josh Williams had a left rear tire go down, and the team looked at the car. They figured it out that it was an adjustment, or the setup, the way they had set up the car, the left rear, something was wrong with it to where it was rubbing the left rear tire. And because of that, all the colleague cars, I think, or at least SVG and Josh Williams, were on similar setups. So because of that, at the end of the stage, they looked at the tire after the pit stop. They said, this thing is wearing way too much. There's a little bit of a rub on it. So we're going to come back down pit road. We're going to pit you again, take the left rear off, make the adjustment we need to make, put it back on, and send you back out there. So that's what they did. SVG had to go to the back of the field because they had to come back down pit road a second time. And because, well, as I said earlier, it was a lengthy pit stop. So regardless of that, he was able to drive his way back up through the field to about 13th, 14th place, used some strategy to his advantage later on in this race, got himself up to about 7th or 8th, fell back to 12th, and kind of just sat there for about 70 laps. I kid you not. He just sat there for about 70 laps. And in this 70 laps was fuel strategy. They were running single file at the top of the racetrack. Jesse Love dominated this race. Guys, for those of you Australians and New Zealanders, who I love very much, by the way, if you have never watched a NASCAR Super Speedway race, it doesn't usually go like this, I promise you. Very rarely do we see one guy lead 150-something out of 170-something laps. It is rare. It is extremely rare. Usually the most laps we see get led by a single guy is 50 to 60. It was a rare occurrence. Everyone ran single file basically the entire day, and it became a fuel mileage race. And in this fuel mileage race, it got wacky at the end. All of the Fords ran out of fuel at the same time with about 2.5 laps to go. Not just the Stewart-Haas Racing Fords. I mean, Herbst and Custer ran out at the exact same time, and I was like, that's a weird coincidence. I guess they're teammates, whatever. And then you go back. Haley Deegan in a Ford, out of fuel. Kyle Sieg or Ryan Sieg, one of the Sieg brothers, in a Ford, out of fuel. And everyone was like, what in the world was Ford looking at? Where did their numbers come from? And why are they all on the exact same? Oh, whatever. Caution comes out. The Sieg brother that was out of fuel ended up stopping on the track, and because of that, there had to be a caution. And under this caution, many drivers pitted and many stayed out. Obviously, the lead 5 or 6 cars, maybe even 7 or 8, stayed out because of the lovely track position they had, because they had a great opportunity at the win. But from about 9th on back, those guys pitted. And that includes our guy, Shane Van Gisbergen. He decided, him and his crew chief, by the way, is Bruce Schlicker. Bruce made the call to bring him down pit road with some other guys. They opted to get themselves some fuel. Not sure if they took tires. It was under commercial, so I did not see the actual pit stop. All I saw was SVG and a bunch of others go down pit road. And this ended up being the decision of the day for that 97 team. Because in front of them at the restart was chaos. Even before the restart was chaos, Justin Allgaier, who was on the front row, ran out of fuel. We saw a couple other cars run out of fuel, and all of a sudden, SVG is starting in like 6th or 7th on the outside row, coming to the green flag, and then the inside row dies, literally dies. Parker Kligerman, who is now the new leader of that inside row, runs out of gas. I think John Hunter Nemechek ran out of gas. A couple other guys run out of gas, so everyone is scattering around these cars that are out of gas. Meanwhile, the top is zooming on by. And then it happens. The guy who's led over 150 laps in this race, Jesse Love, runs out of gas, baby. And that is when we see our guy, SVG, go from 9th or 10th, wherever he was at the beginning of this restart. And all of a sudden, he is in 3rd place, in prime position to potentially win if things get chaotic. Well, things didn't get chaotic, as I have said multiple times. He finishes 3rd in this race. What a race for SVG. He talked about in his post-race interview how he had learned a lot. You know, even though they sat around and did nothing most of the day, he learned a lot about how the car handled, how it felt. just a bunch of other things in terms of the feel, in terms of driving around these drivers. There's so much a driver can learn, even if you're just sitting in a single file line for 150 laps. You learn about what the other drivers are going to do. Who's going to pull out of line first? Who's going to try to do something? Who's going to, maybe bump you a little bit harder? Who are you going to bump and potentially get them out of shape? Who is better to bump? Things of that nature. So while nothing happened in the majority of the race, SVG still learned a lot, and he got a really good third place finish. Now, there's no official podium, you don't get up on the steps like in, F1 or anything, but it is still a podium finish, a P3 for SVG. What a race for him. And he kept it clean too, so I'm not sure what the point standings are right now. They have not been released yet. But I would assume as of today, he is in the NASCAR Xfinity Series playoffs. Once again, there's still 20 races or whatever left to go, so it's not even a lock. The only way you can lock in is by winning, which, it seems like right now he's going to have a really good chance, obviously at those road courses. But, come Talladega, he's learned a lot at these super speedways. But next week is an even bigger test for SVG. We go to Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, it's 1.5 miles like Atlanta, but it is not a super speedway. This is your normal, traditional, intermediate track where the field can get spread out. The leader can get a 6-7 second lead. That's a little extreme, but it's possible. But this is where we're going to see SVG really for the first time, lifting into the corners, using the brakes, having to manage the tires a little bit more. So next week is a big test for the New Zealand driver. But today we focus on Atlanta, and in this Atlanta race, he did fantastic. Once again, he drove great throughout the day, kept the car clean, ran a respectable 10th to 15th the majority of the day. And when it mattered, he made the right moves. They made the right call on top of the pit box to get him in position to have a very respectable, a very solid finish in third. Just his second Xfinity start, and he is finishing third. Austin Hill won the race. I swear, man, it's crazy. This dude only wins on super speedways, except for like Las Vegas last year. And that's it. He is like Dale Earnhardt on super speedways. It's crazy. He has like a 40% win percentage on super speedways. How does he do it? And today, he didn't dominate. He led 2 laps. The last 2 laps of the race. What do we got to do to stop him at these super speedways, man? But for real, congrats to him. He had a great drive today. His teammate was a little bit more deserving of the win, but regardless, he did what he had to do. In Austin Hill, 2 for 2 in 2024. Speaking of 2, his teammate number 2, Jesse Love, heartbreak in only career start number 2. Again with the number 2, man. But yeah, Jesse Love, great day, swept the stages, led the most laps. You got the playoff points, I guess, but Jesse Love's going to get that first win, and I think it's going to happen this year. He's in RCR equipment, which is good equipment. He is a very, very talented young driver, and I have high hopes for him. Him and SVG, that Rookie for the Year battle is going to be a fun one, but I have high hopes for Jesse Love, and he's going to get himself a win this year. So nothing to hang his head down on. It was just so crazy there at the end. And with everyone running out of fuel, they ran a little bit long on that caution, 6 or 7 pace laps. It's tough, but ultimately Jesse Love will be back and he'll win some races this year, as I said. So nothing else really big from this race. The top 10 was whack as it can get. I mean, Austin Hill, Chandler Smith 1-2. That's a little bit normal. SVG third for only his second oval race. That's a little, crazy. Not too crazy because he is SVG. Sheldon Creed fourth. That's not too crazy. Parker Retzlaff back-to-back top 5s. That's a little crazy. Jeremy Clement sixth. Okay. Anthony Alfredo 7th. Jeffrey Earnhardt 8th. Double. Ryan Truex 9th. Okay, that's a little bit more normal. And Sammy Smith 10th. That's a little bit more normal. But for part of that top 10, it got a little... But thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a weekly thing now, if you can't tell. We're going to talk about Shane Van Gisbergen every single week that there's an Xfinity Series race. You, the viewers, love to watch him. I know there's a lot from Australia and New Zealand out there watching these videos, and you guys have appreciated these videos. I see the kind comments every single video we talk about SVG, and I just want to say I appreciated you for watching these videos. That's why I give these updates on them, because you guys watch them. If you watch, I make, I talk about, and that's how I inform you. So thanks again for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And next race for SVG, next Saturday, the Xfinity Series at Las Vegas, baby.